as I think about the topic tonight, the title of the talk says, "Can you find happiness?" And then, as Richard kind of introduced this, he said, "Can you find peace?" And I think we can find peace. I also think we can find joy. Happiness feels a little more fleeting to me. So I'm going to shoot for joy and peace in the midst of anxiety and anxious times and stressful times, because I think we can develop and cultivate a sense of joy and peace no matter what our environment is. And happiness seems to be more context dependent. But anyway, all this to say, let's talk about, what we really mean by loneliness and anxiety and isolation and what that really feels like. And, as Richard mentioned, I have a book out called The End of Adolescence, Lost Art of Delaying Adulthood. And that last piece, Lost Art, Delaying Adulthood, I actually believe that if we delay adulthood a little bit and give you guys a little more time to figure it out, there's an art to it. And all of the popular press that says that, oh my gosh, young adults today aren't doing it right, or they should be doing something different, pay no attention. We'll talk about the lost art of delaying adulthood and what you do with this time. So in our book, students talked about, honestly about their experiences at college. Students responded to a single question at the end of their year, what stood out to them. And then they talked for 45 minutes to 90 minutes about their life. And they talked about being lonely. That even though they were on college campuses, they were living in dorms, this is pre-pandemic, they were living in dorms, they felt lonely. So I'm gonna give you some voices if that's okay. So one student, his name is Gary, and I really like Gary. And he talked about, in terms of being lonely, I don't actually have a tremendous number of very, very close friends here. As a matter of fact, you could say I have 3. And I see people all the time. I just expected more friendships to emerge in this large community. And so even though he was surrounded by people, he just felt alone in it. Students also talked about being anxious, and they're anxious for all kinds of reasons. And so, for example, Jonathan said, I think it's been sort of smoother this year. He was comparing his sophomore year to his freshman year. It's been smoother, less panicky, less ups and downs. This year, I had only one real bad stretch. And I think it's been better. You only have one bad stretch. Can we try to have no bad stretches? So this idea that this sense of anxiety is something that's to be expected, and I don't think it has to be. And Mike, he said, in relation to his courses, he said, it's really hard to not get caught up in the rat race. I mean, kids really get to the point of exhaustion during exam period. A lot of my friends, believe it or not, have intestinal troubles over the exam period. They get so wound up around the exams that they get sick. He went on and talked about how after one of the chem exams that's noted for being really difficult, that people found themselves in the ER with just stress and anxiety. And he's like, it doesn't have to be that way. How do we get off the rat race? Gary, in talking about his future, he talked about being panicked about it. He said, you start to panic when you think you have to decide all of these things. It really isn't true, he told himself. And I'm finding that it makes you a nervous wreck, and it doesn't accomplish any very much. So in reflecting back, he's like, feels this anxiety about having to have everything figured out. He knows it's not true, but he kind of doesn't believe it. They also talked about losing their confidence. A lot of students talked about, coming in confident, but then losing that confidence. So Dylan said, and this one always touches me. It just eats me up. He said, before I came here, I had a lot of confidence in the external things that I did. When I achieved, I was okay. But when I didn't achieve, I really wasn't okay. I didn't have a real deep inbred feeling of confidence. I don't know if I do now, but I think I realized that I didn't have it before. Maybe that has a lot to do with why I'm trying to do so many different things. Maybe it was that I wasn't confident enough to become settled. So here's a student who came in confident, but he felt that his confidence and his worth was only in what he did, not in who he is. And he lacked the confidence to settle down and decide and pursue something, which meant he was like all over campus trying to do everything. And he was only as good as the last thing he did. How is that a way to live? But for so many of the students that I see in my office hours and I see in my class, that's what they're feeling. They're feeling that it's a rat race. They're feeling like they have to catch up. They have to always be working. They're only as good as their last paper. They're squandering their opportunity because they can't figure out how to do it. And it's not possible to do all the things that people feel pressured to do. So my question is, what if the answer to that anxiety, to trying to do everything and be everything, is to stop? Press pause. What if the real answer was to do less and not more? Our students talked about how they spent their time and how they wanted to spend time. And so one student, I'll give you two more quotes. One student, Elaine, as she was thinking about her social life and her work effort, she said, I think I spend too much time studying and not enough on social things. Now, I know no one in this room feels like that's true of them. But it's mainly because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't put all my time into studying. So she just felt so much pressure from studying that she knew she needed a social life, but she didn't know how to fit it in because there was always something else that needed to be done. Another student, I love this student, he said, well, maybe for a few years, I have to forget that I'm human and just be a machine working on the books. But if you rationalize, then if you're going to rationalize further, I think it just carry it to a bad extreme. I don't think, I used to think it was great, It was a sign of real manhood if you could be a Spartan in life, if you could just be disciplined, discipline yourself to the utmost degree. Schedule your whole day out. Don't allow yourself any time for your ideas to flow or gel, but you're so efficient. And then it's just boom, boom, boom. And you get things off real fast and hard. I don't hold that to be true anymore. It's good to be like that for a certain degree. But if you do that too much, you're a machine and not a man. But we feel this pressure to be Spartan in our time and to do things again and again and again. But as a Christian, I feel like we're not evaluated by what we did or what we do or what we become. Our value is in who we are and how we spend our time. And how we spend our time is a function of how we think about our mental health. So there's a couple of scriptures I want to share with you that have always been important to me as I think about managing my own anxiety. And then we can talk about how that's looked like in my life, in the Q&A. One of the scriptures is from Philippians 4:6. It says, do not be anxious for anything, but in everything, in prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God will transcend all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. So here it's like, put it before God. He doesn't say he's going to do all your homework, but he says he's going to give you peace, right? Lean in and get peace. But how does that work? Students in our study wanted to press pause, but they didn't feel like they could. And part of this pressing pause is figuring out, what are you supposed to be doing here? Why are you here? Where are you headed? What's your purpose in life? And like one of the students says, he wasn't confident enough to settle down. So he was doing all kinds of things, which meant he wasn't doing what he was meant to do or what his purpose is. And so part of it is to do and find what's fulfilling to you and pursue that purpose. And then once you figure out your purpose and why you're here, and here I mean metaphysically, not just here at RIT, but why you're here on this earth at this historical moment. What's your value to yourself and to society? And when you figure that out, you can let everything else go. You can say no to things and not feel like you're missing out. So Hebrews 12:1 says, let's throw off everything that hinders and let's run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. That we have a race where to run, and let's run it with perseverance. And how do you find that race? It's what your purpose is, and taking time to figure out what is the meaning in your life. And once you have that sense of meaning and purpose, it becomes easier to say, I'm going to press pause on the other things and trust in God. And it's not just trusting in religion, it's trusting in a person, which means that if I press pause, there's a real risk that while I'm taking a sabbatical and I'm taking a break, people are going to run past me because I've stood still, right? And you get this feeling like, oh my gosh, if I take a day off, then people are going to get ahead of me. And that's going to be true. But are they going to be at peace? And are they actually pursuing their purpose? And do you trust that when you press pause, you're going to be better for it from a mental health standpoint, from a joy standpoint, and from a peace standpoint? And we could talk in the Q&A how that's looked like in my life and the kinds of scriptures that I lean into and how this has worked for me. But I'll stop there. Thanks, Richard.
And David, can you continue?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to express appreciation for being able to be a part of the Veritas series, working with you, Richard, and of course, being a panelist with Nancy. We've all just gotten a very quick and clear taste of what the power of Nancy's knowledge and the work that she does, and the spirit she brings to space when we're having conversations. So I feel honored to be here and to be part of this conversation. I'm going to add another layer and another lens of perspective to student anxiety, because it's really been my professional world for, as Richard said, 15 plus years. As a university and counseling center director and leader, I am part of a larger network of college and university leaders in mental health across the country. Directors in counseling centers, we're really well organized, and we share a tremendous amount of information. One of the things we do on an annual basis, and we've been doing it for decades, is collecting lots of information about what we're seeing and what we're doing in counseling centers, again, all over the country. And one of the basic questions that we ask and we gather is what are students bringing to those clinical offices? What are the clinicians speaking to college students about? And the top three issues were really consistent for a really long time. About a third of students seeking mental health services were struggling with what was described as depression. And then just under a third, it was anxiety. And then the third most prevalent issue was relationships, and relationships being intimate dating partners, friends, peers, and family, and the struggles with family relationships. So depression, anxiety, and relationships were just predominantly the three issues, with depression at top. And then we started to see anxiety creeping up a little bit. And then it was in 2010, so now a dozen years ago, where anxiety surpassed depression as the most prevalent issue that students are bringing to university counseling centers. And every year since then, the percentage of students reporting just impairing levels of anxiety has grown exponentially. Now, this past year, 70% of students that are seeking mental health services on campuses are reporting some degree of distress around anxiety. It's remarkable when you see this plotted out on a graph. Just reports of struggles with anxiety has grown and grown and grown. And it's no surprise too that what's grown in alongside that, what Nancy captured in those narratives, is loneliness and isolation. Because the most prevalent type of anxiety that we're seeing is social anxiety, increasing prevalence of social anxiety, which is a fear of engaging with others. And if we have a fear and apprehension of engaging with others, we're going to be more prone to be isolated because of the difficulty in not being isolated. So the question then becomes, why is that trend the way it is? Why might our young adults be more and more anxious, and particularly socially anxious? There's another line of research that just follows, correlates really well with this, and they've been tracking experiences of our children and adolescents over decades as well. And one of the questions that they've been asking since 1987 was, how much time do you spend with your peers, face-to-face, engaging in social activity with your peers? And the smallest category, the least amount of time, is 0 to 5 hours a week. And in 1987, only 17% of high school seniors that were surveyed, 17% said they spent 0 to 5 hours a week with their peers. And now, today, that number is almost reaching 50%. 50% of high school seniors are spending 0 to 5 hours a week with their peers in face-to-face interactions. So, to me, that is probably the most single powerful data point that explains the increase in social anxiety. We also see that trend is happening with all other types of social activity. So the percentage of students that are dating, engaging in like partying behavior in high school, engaged in high school athletics, engaged in part-time work in high school, engaged in communities of faith, volunteering opportunities, all of those are on the decline as well, which again is leading to greater isolation. And I think those changes are in part because how we are shifting as a society and how we have shifted in our parenting. It's in my general judgment and interpretation of these findings is that children have less opportunity to engage with their peers without us around, without adult supervision. And I think we have been raised as parents to feel a sense of responsibility that we should be overseeing what they're doing, and we should be intervening when they are starting to struggle with some social activity. Like when they start fighting with their peers, we feel a sense of obligation that we should help and intervene in some kind of way. But if you think about it, and so many of us, we had the opportunity to do that. We were outside with our friends, with our peers, and we had the freedom to do a lot of things that really helped grow our interpersonal skills. We had the freedom to engage in imaginary play. We had to negotiate rules with our peers. We had to argue with our peers if those rules didn't make sense. We had to renegotiate rules. We had to learn how to fight with each other, but more importantly, how to reconcile with each other. All of those lead to the development of more sophisticated interpersonal skills. So I think that our children and adolescents have less opportunity in those types of situations. Therefore, it's not that they don't have the skills or are incapable of it, but it's just they haven't had enough time, exposure, and opportunity to be in those situations to cultivate those skills. So now they're getting to college with far less experience, sitting across from someone they really don't know and engaging in a conversation, and a meaningful conversation, a conversation about things that are important to them. That is new territory. It's unfamiliar territory. And of course, we're nervous and anxious when we're doing something new. But so often our impulse can be, if it's scary, I should avoid it and stay away. I think another part of the intervention is how can we reframe some of the anxiety we experience and retrain ourselves to approach the anxiety, approach the things that worry us, and that will help retrain us to not be as anxious about those things. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time on campuses, thinking about how we can reshape our learning environments to take into account this higher prevalence of anxiety, because education, in my opinion, and many others, it is an interpersonal endeavor. It is a social endeavor. We expect students to engage and build relationships with people all over campus, with their faculty, with their academic advisors, with their peers, with other campus leaders, and engage in activities. That's really hard if you haven't done a lot of that before. And it can really get in the way of the academic admission and their academic success. So rethinking about how we can help them lean into the anxiety, not listen to it too strongly, some of it, and take the challenges and the risk to engage in relationships with other people. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what's going to be the cure for isolation is connecting with other people, dialoguing with other people, spending time with other people, and just making that more and more a deeper part of our lives.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for those good opening statements. I mean, those are incredibly insightful. And what we've done is prior to this meeting, prior to the forum, we actually got a panel of students together and we asked them about what are you really thinking about? What are your big issues related to anxiety and pressure? And we're going to now discuss some of those. And after we've discussed them, we're going to open up questions to our panelists. The first question that the students identified is we classified as life on the hamster wheel. And it was really the question about how do we stop from always trying to do more? How can we stop ourselves when we're overloaded from saying, I'm going to do one more thing, even though I don't have time for it? What are your thoughts?
Nancy, feel free. I think you speak really well on the hamster wheel issue.
Yeah, it's flipping the question. It's like the answer is like not how do I stop? Why do I keep going? And I think part of the, flipping it on its head and this idea of doing less means you're doing more is this fallacy that if I worked 24 hours, 7 days a week, I'm actually going to be able to do all the things I think I should be able to do. And the reality is that we're not designed to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And we're designed to rest. We're designed to pause. And what happens when we rest and we pause and we get off the hamster wheel, we're actually more efficient. And so when you take a day to hang out with your friends and to build those social connections that David talked about, your brain is still working out that problem set that you were worried about. It's still working out in your subconscious, but you're giving your brain a break and you're giving your mental health a boost. And what you'll find, if you trust it, is that if you press pause, take the break, sleep, you're going to be more efficient in your waking hours. And I find that if I don't get enough sleep, I'm inefficient. It just takes longer to do the things that I should be able to do. And so the question is like, how do you not take a break?
Nancy, can I interject for a moment? You mentioned before when we were prepping for this forum that you had a personal story about when you were a new faculty member and you were going through tenure, which at the schools you've been to are quite harrowing experiences. Well, they're harrowing experiences everywhere, but where your schools were very much harrowing. So could you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, I can. So I was a new assistant professor. I was at Duke University. And if you're going to get tenure, you've got to publish and publish and publish and collect data and publish. And you've got to teach your courses, and you've got to teach your courses really, really well. And so there's this tendency that, I should always be writing something. I should always be doing something. And there's a culture in the school, in my department at that time, that, and I think it's true in many universities, it's like, the haggard professor who has no time and complains and, is eager for the end of the semester. And so there I was, modeling this from, myself. And I was like wishing the semester away. And oh my gosh, this is so much work to do. I can't sleep and I can't do this. And I found myself wishing away the semester. Like, oh my gosh, can't wait till it's over. And I had this epiphany that if I was going to wish the semester away, then I was going to end up wishing my life away one semester at a time. And the pathway I was on of trying to work 7 days a week and not sleep, get up early, stay up late, write papers, collect data all the time, it wasn't sustainable from a physical or a mental health standpoint. And as a woman of faith, I thought, I'm going to try this. They say take a Sabbath. I'm going to try it. And I decided that I was going to work 5 days, work hard those 5 days. Fifth day, do all the things you have to do to live, laundry, grocery shopping, all that sort of stuff. But I was going to take a Sabbath. I was going to take a day of rest and reflect and, spiritually go to church. And I was going to sleep at night. I was going to sleep 7 hours, 7.5. And I find if I sleep 7.5, I'll wake up. I don't need an alarm. I'll wake up. And then I'm a dreamer, which is how I ended up in psychology. So that extra 30 minutes in bed to get to 8 hours, I get to contemplate what I was dreaming about. And you know what happens is in that 30 minutes, I'll wake up with sentences flowing in my head of a paper that I'm working on, or an idea about a journal to submit a paper to. So it's like letting my brain rest actually made it more creative. And as I, talk to God about this, because I talk to God like he's a person, because in my world, he is a person. When I talk to God, he's like, trust me on this. And what I found was for a 10-year stretch, every time I submitted a paper for publication, even to journals that reject 85% of the papers that you submit, I never had a rejection. For 10 years, every time I submitted a paper, no matter where I submitted it, it got accepted. And it was just like this faith statement, like, hey, Nancy, if you just do this my way, take the Sabbath, sleep at night, take a break, your brain's going to work anyway. And you're going to be more efficient. You're going to be happier. And you're going to enjoy your work. You're going to enjoy your students, because you're going to have time to enjoy your students, because they can come in your office hours and you're not looking at the clock because you need to write the paper. You're like, I can write the paper. It's no problem. And so I had this period of time that had that stretch. And as I likened it is in our earlier conversation, Daniel in the Bible talked, he was supposed to eat all the king's meat, and that was going to make him strong and a warrior as they were in exile in Babylon. And he decided he was, in his relationship with God, he was going to be a vegetarian. Now, I'm a vegetarian, but it has nothing to do with that. It was this idea that, could I be as strong if I'm not eating meat? And it was just his little secret with God, that he could trust God, that even if he didn't do all the work and all of the stuff that he was supposed, that everybody else said that he should do, if he just trusted God to press pause, to follow his way, that God was going to come through. And that's been true in my life in those days. And it's true in my life in other ways today. And I still sleep 7.5 hours, take a Sabbath, hang out with my kids, hang out with my husband, and try to have a full life. And that's how you live your whole life. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But that's how it's worked for me.
David, what about yourself?
Yeah, well, Nancy, I identify with, certainly the power of sleep. And if there is ever any silver bullet in health and medicine, it is sleep. Sleep will cure most many things. And like you, with a really consistent and healthy sleep schedule, I've not used an alarm clock in over 20 years. The body learns and takes care of itself. It knows what it needs to do. It's just, It's been fantastic. Yes. And I will add to that from my perspective and what I've talked about already. Part of it is about figuring out the things that we do that are really important to us, that are part of our calling, that are part of our purpose. With the hamster wheel mentality, we can pile on all sorts of things. And sometimes we have a difficult time saying no and take on things that really are pretty far removed from what really is important to us. So I think that is an essential process, is to figure out really what is my core focus, what is my core value, what deserves really my attention. And you know what? You know when you're working on something that really matters to you at your core, when the work doesn't feel like work. And when work doesn't feel like work, it tends to be less stressful. Mm-hmm. It becomes part of your existence. It becomes part of your living and breathing, and it feels less like a chore. So the more of that you have on your plate, the less anxiety and the less exhaustion and burnout you're likely to feel. So there's the process of figuring out, what am I doing that really matters, and what are those things that I'm not doing that matters? And I truly believe that in order to really have a meaningful conversation around that and to figure that out, we need other human beings to talk to about it. We need to get out of our own head. And this goes back to getting comfortable talking to other people and really asking for help. So I'm overwhelmed, I've taken on too much. What I need to do is reach out to someone and be able to talk about it and sort through all of that. So to me, it's gonna get back to building that capacity for meaningful relationships, because that's going to be one of the more effective tools to work through any kind of challenge that faces us. Is being connected to other people and forces and faith and other type and purpose and initiatives and all of those things. Really getting connected and leaning on those things for our own process.
Can I add to that? I just want to build on what you're saying, David, because it's so important to think about, how do you find your purpose, and who are you talking to about it, and how do you reflect out your purpose? How do you reflect other people's purposes back to them? And one of the things that we find in our work is that college students have a difficult time figuring out where to find friends. And how you found friends in high school isn't the way you find them in college, right? So you think in high school, you're friends with with people you're in class with. And you go into a classroom in high school and everybody knows everybody else's name and everybody else's business, right? In college, it's really hard to make friends in class because you're all in class. And the way in which people make friends in college is through these extracurricular activities that are on things that you're interested in, clubs, volunteer kinds of things, even if it's clubs on things that are related to your goals and your major. But they're clubs, they're student run, so that you're learning and having this opportunity that David described to lead with someone and to negotiate with someone and to grow your own interests in relation to other people. And so you need these social activities and other things that are outside of your schoolwork to have those relationships and to have an outlet to find and hone your purpose. And then once you find that, it's easier to say no to the things that are on your plate that are stressful to you, that you don't look at someone else and say, and you have this fear of missing out. Oh, they're doing this, I should be doing this. Or you see someone's, TikTok or Instagram feed and they look like they have it all together. And you're like, oh, they're doing this, I should be doing that. How do you use a tool to say no? And I look at everything that's on my list and I have to have a good why. You ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? And it better lead up to purpose. And if it doesn't lead up to purpose, cut it.
That actually leads right into the next question that students came up with. And it really was seeking relief. When you have anxiety, and how are the best ways to address that? And let's start with David, because David, you've said that anxiety all the time is what you're seeing all the time. And that's what's overwhelming now, even more so than depression. Somebody comes into you and says, I'm just anxious, I'm doing too much, I'm having problems finding friends. What do you say? How do you address that?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two angles, I think, generally, that I take on anxiety. Anxiety is a physical response. It's a body's reacting in a certain way. right? Racing heart, tense muscles, tightness in our core, all of those, excessive sweating, right? Loss of appetite. And so part of it is tending to the physical side of it. Anxiety is there's a tremendous amount of physical energy behind it, and it doesn't have an outlet. So creating some type of physical regimen to release some of that anxiety is a really helpful tool. Even if it is a walk outside, like a night like tonight, the sun is out. It is a beautiful last day in March. It hasn't been like that for the last few days, but days like this, it's easy to go out and just give our body a chance to move a bit. And that takes care of some of it. But then there's also, it's not just physical, there's a cognitive process to it as well. And that gets back to some of the things I was saying earlier. Anxiety, when we feel it physiologically, it's basically telling ourselves there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And I need to respond, or something, maybe something bad's going to happen. So a very common, but less in most scenarios, especially on campuses in higher education and in most social situations, the anticipated fear isn't actually a threat. It's not actually harmful to us. Of course, if you're walking in the woods and a bear jumps out, you're going to feel really anxious and really scared for legitimate reasons. But much of the anxiety that we experience in contemporary times is based on something else. It's not necessarily a real threat out there. But again, there are certain social trends that are threatening. But it's understanding that it's not an actual threat, and not giving into that natural survival impulse to move away and back away from it. So it's leaning into the anxiety, leaning into what feels scary, like this idea that I've got too much on my plate and there's nothing I can do about it. We'll start to have open and honest conversation. That in and of itself might feel scary to do. So you lean into the problem, lean into the fear, lean into what feels threatening, and verbalize it. Start talking about it. Make it very real, and that gets us on a path to be able to dismantle it and adapt our response to it. So it's less anxiety provoking. But when we avoid something, it actually gets bigger and more powerful, because when we avoid it, we then train ourselves to think, good, I avoided it, nothing bad happened, so I have to keep doing that. So then the perceived threat gets larger and larger and larger. Mm-hmm. So physically work it out and cognitively move towards it so we can understand it more and work with it more intensely.
Nancy, your thoughts?
I think David just said it. I mean, it's really, I think you nailed it. I mean, I don't have nothing to add. But it is this kind of figuring out the source of it, working out the physical of it, and not hiding from it. So you hide from it, it gets bigger.
Well, then let's actually go to the next question. And what I ask the audience is, if you have questions or responses you'd like to our panelists, please begin to write them down, and then they'll be filtered through us as we go through this last question that our earlier panel had come up with. But the other is really about institutional support. What structures or resources can we go to when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we can't stop, when we feel like we're imposters and we shouldn't be where we are? Could you start, Nancy?
I could start. I mean, if we think about structures and support, we spend a lot of time thinking about what does advising look like. And I know David will talk about, what counseling and things like, and the resources that are available on campus. But what does advising look like? And I think, figuring out, who are the people that are good mentors. And in our work, we kind of think about mentors in three ways. We think about mentors who are mirrors. We call them mirrors, windows, and guiding lights. That's what we call them. And so mirrors are people that can, they hold a mirror up to you, literally or figuratively, and reflect back to you who you are. So when you're feeling in doubt, you're feeling like, you're an imposter, you don't belong, and everyone else has it together, and I don't know why I'm here anyway. or I know why I'm here, but I'm not good at it. The mirrors are the people who affirm you. They remind you what you're good at. They remind you who you are. They remind you why you're here. And they're often family members because they know you best, but they're also your best friends. And they're also random people on the street that just tell you, hey, you're good at that. But it's these people that just affirm you. And you need people in your life that affirm you. And as we think about advising in a college campus structure, that's one way of thinking about it, is having people around that know you well enough that can be a good mirror. Windows are people who can help you think about the landscape ahead. Like, you guys are creative in STEM and in arts, and those kinds of careers are amazing, but they're difficult to piece together and kind of figure out how do you do it and what do you do next. And mentors that are windows kind of help you identify what's on the landscape and how can you take your interest and make a career at it. What are the options, that are before you? And guiding lights are people who tell you the path forward. Now that you know what you want to do, what are the first steps? And so we think about structures, we think about mentorship. We also think about structures that help people figure out how to press pause, how to take time off. And a lot of students that are in our studies, they want to stop the clock. They feel like they have been running since middle school, trying to get in the right classes in middle school so that they can be in the AP classes and honors classes in high school, and in the right classes in high school so they can get into the right college. And now they're in the right college, and now they're like, oh my gosh, I'm on to the next thing. And they want to, this is back to the treadmill question, they want to stop. But there's no structure inside the college context that lets people stop and take a break, a semester, a half a semester, and just sort through everything they've been through and everything that they desire, to take an evaluation of all of their experiences and put themselves back together. And if I were going to create a structure in college, it would be a structure that gave students time and guided reflection to do this. And students will say, oh, you can study abroad, but some people are like, I can't study abroad because I have too many courses or I can't afford it. But that's not pausing. You have to study while you're abroad, even if it is fun. It just gives you something else you have to do and a change of scenery, which is good, but it's giving you another goal. And so how do we create a space where people can stop? A lot of students that say, can I just take a semester off? And their parents are like, no, you can't. You have 4 years. That's all you got, right? Or whatever the number is. But parents don't want you to take the break because they're afraid you won't come back. And students that we encounter, they want the break. And the way the college system is set up, there's no space or time for that kind of open reflection. And so those are the kinds of structures I would think about, is creating that space and time to reflect, think, pause, and then also thinking about mentorship.
Yeah, and I'm piggybacking on the taking a pause. I think about RIT, and there is some policy in place which makes it pretty easy for students to take a pause. There's a leave of absence option in place for when students really start to struggle and they really need to take a pause. And yeah, like Nancy said, the resistance to that is really interesting, and it comes from different places. Sometimes it comes from parents. Sometimes it comes from the student. Sometimes from the student's perspective, some of them feeling like if they get a semester behind, they're lagging behind their entire generation and they'll never be able to catch up. That's what it feels like in the moment. And I think sometimes too, that's also a reflection of the distress that they're currently in. And that's how they're experiencing a lot of aspects of their life in the world. And it's even more indicative of a need to take a pause and get some rest and get some greater wellness in their life and come back and be strong and more productive as ever, as Nancy talked about earlier. So thinking more about those types of structures and options and how to normalize them as a part of the learning process, that the learning process, at least let's say for the undergrad years, isn't necessarily this chiseled out 4 years. So, education can be a lifetime if necessary. There's all sorts of options. But the most importantly, we want to be in a good place as a functional thinker and professional when we get to the end of that education. When we're applying it, we want to be in a good place to do that, mm-hmm. and that's what's most important. So yeah, I definitely agree on those things. That how can we in many dynamic ways encourage students to take a pause when they need to, and many may need to from time to time.
Can I interject? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I interject with one question? I wanted to ask about community. I'm looking at questions that are coming in, and we're talking about support. What is the role of having a community? What is the role of someone saying, I'm here, I'm anxious, I'm really challenged, I haven't found community? How can they do that? How can they find that?
I'll start with a perspective on this, because it gets back to what I've really been putting my attention on. I think a community should take some responsibility in cultivating a clear and consistent message throughout that community, because that's when it's going to be most effective, when everyone in the community is sort of on the same page in terms of, we can say, how should a student take care of themselves when they start to struggle? What should they do? Every facet of a campus should be answering that question in the same way, with the same language. So when new community members come into that environment, they're getting it from day one in all their interactions. Oh yes, this is what I need to do when I start struggling. This is what's expected of me. Everybody expects this of me. Gosh, it's so normal. But if the message isn't shared and there's mixed messages, then it becomes really confusing and then really hard to take action, because ultimately, who wants to do the wrong thing? Nobody does. So I think a community has some responsibility on developing a cohesive culture and message to new community members.
I would co-sign everything that you just said, David. I mean, it's so important to have those social norms that are part of the community that help people both fit and know how to fit and know what to expect. And it is hard to find community on campus. And what we find is, part of what you learn in college is the stuff you're studying in class. But what you really learn in college are all these other things. And one of the things that you learn in college that you don't come in knowing, that you kind of need to know as a life skill, is how to build community, how to pick yourself up from one place and move yourself to another place and find community and build community. And in today's economy and culture, it's global. The likelihood that you're going to stay in the same neighborhood that you grew up is unlikely. And you're going to have to pick yourself up and move and find, and you've done it already, as you come into college. So one of the first things you learn that's not academic in college is how to find community. And so it's not surprising that you don't know yet, that college students come in and they don't make friends the way they thought they were going to find them, and they have difficulty finding community. But, as David said, you got to put yourself out there. You got to lean into the anxiety, and you're going to kind of stumble into a group, and you're going to I don't know if I fit here or not, but I'm going to hold my breath and jump in. Take a friend with you. But, and then over time, you do this a couple of times, because you're going to leave college and you're going to start graduate school or a job. You might have to move again. And sure enough, that skill you learned about building community in your freshman, sophomore year is going to come in handy, because you're going to build a community again. And, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that, today's 20-somethings are going to change jobs 10 times before their career is over, which means you're going to build community probably 9 more times after you leave here. And so you'll get better at it, but don't be afraid of it. And, build those communities around your interests. Build them around, your, faith, whatever the faith is, churches, synagogues, mosques, they're communities. They're communities with social norms. And, and for the most part, they're all welcoming. And so the risk of entry can be a little bit less than some of the other clubs in many ways. But there is this need to kind of just take the leap and know that everybody else there was new once as well and remembers what it was like to be new. And it's just one of those little risks that's going to pay off dividends, both in terms of feeling a sense of belonging and connection and having a social support network. And you're going to learn this valuable skill about, how to pick yourself up and move into a new community and find yourself. People do this in different ways. They do it through faith communities. They do it through professional networks. They do it through sororities and fraternities. There are ways in which you can kind of connect to community that are going to help you learn this skill over the course of your life.
I had a question about from students that it's really a question about, I think, social media and the Zoom COVID environment, but how would increased face-to-face interaction lead to a reduction in the rat race, to things being slower perhaps, and people being less anxious?
Well, more face-to-face interactions. With more face-to-face interactions, that will be probably one of the quickest and most effective ways to reduce social anxiety around social interactions, social obligations, engaging in so many activities, both academic and social. Being accustomed to seeing each other's faces does so much to ease ourselves. And once we start to fear it less, we are really social creatures. We're designed to be with each other. We're designed to have a sense of safety and comfort with each other. One of the most effective stress management strategies is to spend time with other people that know you, that you're comfortable with. Just that gives us so much. So just being able to get more comfortable, having a close, physically close, emotionally close community will do wonders for managing all the difficult stuff in life.
And I'm going to ask a question to Nancy that builds on this. We had a couple people ask questions about how do you make more meaningful friendships in those communities and support? What if I don't know how to do that? How do I do that?
Yeah, I want to build on what David said, and I'll talk about that too around the social media versus in person. Social media in many ways it's curated, and so you're never going to get the whole 3D person off of social media, right? And so you're going to get what they chose to put up, and they're going to get what you chose to put up, which is a fraction of who you are. And after 2 years of teaching classes online, I miss seeing the whole body of someone. Like when I would meet students out after teaching online, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're tall, or, you're 3D. And so this kind of being in people's presence, there's in biology, there's, pheromones, right? That kind of you sense as you connect with people, but there's that too in humans, and this social connection, this, the touch that comes and comfort that comes from giving and receiving a hug, the sense of acceptance that comes with having a meal with someone, breaking bread with someone. You can't do that on social media. You can take pictures of your food and hold it up, but you can't actually taste and enjoy food with someone until you're in person. And there's nothing more joyful and peace-giving than to sit with a group of people and enjoy food together and laugh out loud together and touch each other, even if it's just like touching on the arm or touch on the shoulder. There's just comfort and peace that comes with that. And how do you make a friend? You gotta be a friend. You think about what kind of support do you need? It's likely the kind of support that someone else needs. You see someone sitting at the, eating alone, go sit with them. They might not become your best friend, but they might become a best friend,
Mhm.
but and you're just kind of putting yourself out there and just try it. And you're going to fail miserably a couple of times, and you're going to laugh about it afterwards. But it's the only way to make friends. Join a club that is something that you're interested in doing, something you'd like to learn. I remember in college, I joined a sailing club. Are you kidding? I grew up in Ohio, but I wanted to sail. It didn't last very long, but it was fun. The idea of it, And so finding hobbies that take you out there and put you with you. No, you don't do any solitary. I love knitting. I actually knit. Knitting is a solitary thing unless you join a knitting club. And then there better be food there. But it's that kind of thing. Just trying to find people and be the friend you want to be.
That's so beautifully said, Nancy. And I will add to it what I so often hear from students over the years that ask this question and struggle with it is first to really the importance of finding their voice. One of the developmental, in my mind, a developmental milestone for all of us is being able to find our voice. We all have it, but we're all socialized in different ways about the power of our voice. Some of us are socialized not to have one, and not to have one in certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. So encouraging all students, and that's part of the education mission too, I believe, is to think critically and to be able to articulate your thoughts and your ideas and having that voice. So developing friendship starts with having your voice and exercising it. There's a quote on the one of the plaques on my walls. It's speak your voice even when it shakes, and that's about what it's like to get stronger. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and so it starts there. And so, but the other barrier is the word is weird. The fear of reaching out to peers and engaging with a stranger is I hear all that, they're gonna think I'm weird. So the question remains, so what's more uncomfortable, being perceived as weird in a moment or living in isolation? Think that's an important equation to work through. Perceived being weirdness, that's going to be fleeting. And the more we do it, the probably the less awkward we're going to be at it, right? It's a skill. It's going to require practice. And again, it gets back to confronting the anxiety and the fear, leaning into it, and continuously trying to connect with others.
We have one more question, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of go into closing statements from each of you. So someone asked, they said, I'm working with a religious student organization. What do you think the role of student organizations are in general for supporting people, and especially religious organizations of all type?
I think that's what their mission is. That's what it is. And, the faith organizations, probably more so, I would hold them to a higher account of building a community and giving to the community. And, doing good and being accepting, modeling forgiveness. I think is, students that I encounter, I think, David, as you said, find your voice. And I think that's right. And I think part of what makes people silent, I hear from the students that I interact with, is that they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. They're afraid they're going to say something. They want to have deep conversations, but they're afraid they're going to offend someone. So when you say weird versus isolation, the third, axis is weird, isolation, I've offended someone. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you might offend someone. And so learning an earnest, I'm sorry, and giving others a fresh start as you would want a fresh start, because being in connection is so important. And we have to be forgiving of one another and accepting of one another, and knowing that none of us are perfect and we're all trying to figure this out. And I think with the community groups, and particularly the faith groups, modeling and exercising acceptance and forgiveness is so essential. If you're not going to get it in the faith communities, where are we going to get it?
Yeah, the organizations, the community is the first word that comes to mind. And to piggyback on Nancy, student organizations, that's why it's so important to have a clear mission and purpose, because that's the connecting point, that shared mission and purpose. Mm-hmm. And certainly those communities of faith, having those foundational, fundamental principles of kindness, love, compassion, and forgiveness. That's at the core, and everything grows out of that. It's a place. Those are more deliberate spaces to communicate, to connect with other people, and to be a part of, and to share some form of identity.
Yeah. And I just want to plug these conversation hours that you guys were talking about. You can sign up for a cup of coffee and talk to someone. That sounds like talk about, I don't know, is that weird? I'm like, yeah, it's probably weird, but you probably should do it. Because and then you know what you could say, you could sit down and you could both agree this is weird, and you have common ground right off the bat, and you can really connect with someone. And interestingly, I just signed up for one in my own department because we've all been off campus for a year and a half. And so I just signed up. They're going to buy us a cup of coffee, and I'm going to go meet this faculty member that I've never met. We're going to have coffee. I don't know what's going to come of it, but it's putting myself out there.
Well, now what we have about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to have both of you make some sort of closing statement about our discussion topic, or any comments you might have to individuals watching this that are anxious, that are thinking that things are tough for them and don't know where to go.
I'm happy to start. You know, if I think of try to summarize, to boil it down to one primary point, you know, I think it is finding the anxiety is telling us high levels of anxiety, not the normal anxiety, but really the disturbing levels of anxiety. It's telling us that that something should change, that we need to reevaluate something and take a different course. Mm-hmm. And so I just would want everyone to think about how can they manifest the courage and the strength, and think about what they would need to be able to make those kinds of necessary changes in their life. But it will take risk. It's risk taking, courage, and not necessarily true faith and belief that the outcome is going to be good, because you don't know ultimately. But that's where connecting with other people, taking the risk, and taking some sort of course of action, challenging all these ideas that we have bombarding us about who we're supposed to be and what we should be doing, and really giving yourself time to be like, all right, I need to challenge those a little bit, or think more critically about where they're coming from and how they really fit for me. And just having the courage to do that, finding that courage.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I would add that you're not alone, that for so many college students, they feel like they're the only ones who don't have it figured out. They're the only ones that don't have a friendship group or a community. And it's more common than you imagine. And so in some ways it's part of the process, but it's also part of the answer. And so knowing that you're not alone, being bold to reach out to the resources on campus, whether it's David's office or your clubs or your friends, your family. Don't suffer it alone. But also don't rush through this period of early adulthood, and to take the time You'll never get time like this again, where you're in college and taking courses and have the opportunity to meet up with friends and change course, change majors, change directions. Don't wish it away. Lean into it and take the time you need to figure it out and to try things that you might dislike or like, that you'll never have another opportunity like this to try things so easily. You can learn something new just by signing up for a course. It'll never be that easy again. And so leaning into those opportunities and to find balance and purpose and saying no to things that aren't part of your purpose. Don't sign up just because everybody else did. Sign up because it's who you are. And I'm reminded what it says in the book of Jeremiah, that the Lord has a plan for you, a purpose not to harm you, but to give you hope and a future. Not hope for the future, hope and a future. And it's in that hope that we can hold on to and find our purpose and live this life. And then it's going to lead to our future. So it's hope and a future. Purpose to prosper you, not to harm you. And you are here unto a purpose. So you've got to run your race, not somebody else's race. Find your race and run it. Persevere and take the crown.